On a day like today, you'd think there's nothing possible that could go wrong. And that's what they thought back in 1854. It was October, and you had south of Newcastle, of course, the glory that is Gateshead. Yet there were no Hiltons, there were no slugs, there were no spillers. Instead, there were an awful lot of factories and warehouses. There were homes too, tenements, and back then tenements used to house not just mothers and fathers and their children, but grandparents, in some cases great-grandparents, aunts and uncles. Houses were filled. We're on a gantry now with a little bit of a shake, and it's interesting that that's the case because there was a heck of a shake back then. It started off over there where there was a factory called Wilson's, roughly where the Hilton stands now. They were a worsted, they made worsted, and they needed certain chemicals to be able to create the fabric. And a fire started. And because the building was made out of wood, because there were chemicals there, it went up very, very quickly indeed. However, little did they know that next door, well, two along frankly, were Bertrand's. Now Bertrand's, they had caustic soda and a whole host of other chemicals that, if they happened to be united by some of the chemicals from Wilson's, something very bad was about to happen, and it did. The fire spread the entire length of the bank, and then it started to fire. Barrels filled with chemicals were fired up into the air. 2,800 tons of sulfur, 128 tons of nitrate of soda, combustible chemicals, buildings that were said to be fireproof, but the intense heat made them explode. They were firing up to 3/4 of a ton into Newcastle. Grey Street was hit by missiles fired from the Gateshead side. Now, if you can imagine a black sky, I know we've got grey sky coming in, but this was jet black, this was soot, this was the wood burning, and then you have an immense firestorm literally crossing the bridges. All of these barrels landing on stone houses, and the stone houses remain. A lot of these buildings were still here. But what about the little wooden tenements that went right the way up every bank behind them? Hundreds of tenements and people dying left, right and centre. Entire families. There's one story of just up in Sandgate where an entire family perished, and when they found them, 16 bodies all together clinging to one another. This was an awful time, a firestorm of the kind that you cannot escape from. Both ends of the quay were burning, all of the buildings were burning. And what happened? Human nature at its darkest. We're talking about Tales of Dark Newcastle. On the high level bridge there, up to 20,000 people came to watch people burn. Now, as if that wasn't bad enough, then came the explosion. A lot of these buildings had chemicals of one sort or another. Many of them had even more barrels in heaps and piles, thousands of them. And the heat became so intense that there was one explosion when it all went up. People standing on the bridge fell to their feet. Some almost went over the side. People on the bridge then began running in all directions because they knew something incredible and horrific had just happened. It left a crater on the Gateshead side 50 feet round. This explosion was heard in Hartlepool, knocking people off their feet. In Hexham, along the river, everybody thought it was an earthquake. Up as far as Alnwick in Northumberland, everybody heard it, and they could all see this huge pillar of smoke. As I say, 20,000 people came just to gawp, just to see, and another 20,000 apparently over the next few weeks came to walk along here and see the burnt out, twisted wreckage where people had died. The ships along the side of the quay were all burnt because the firestorm had engulfed them. So, has that left a stain? Well, something like that couldn't help but leave a stain. There used to be a floating nightclub on this side of the river, just there. The Tuxedo Princess, it was. One of the security guards once rang me and said, "Alan, I've just seen something really peculiar." I was working on the door as a bouncer, and I saw someone on fire on the quayside, screaming, yelling. I got a hold of a couple of the lads. We went running with fire extinguishers and a fire bucket to see if we could help. We all saw him, and yet when we got outside, there's nobody there. Now, along the quayside, it said that one of the most famous silkies was burned in the fire. We think it was someone quite different. More stories to come. Tales of Dark Newcastle from the heart of that very place.